My parents skipped my wedding for my brother's big game. Now they are facing the consequences. When Nulin walks down the aisle, 2 seats are left empty by choice. For once, everyone sees what she's lived with all her life. As the fallout quietly unfolds, Nulin is finally faced with a question she never dared ask aloud. What happens when the people who raised you never really saw you at all? You sent them an invitation, right? My cousin, Brooklyn, whispered, glancing at the empty seats at the family table. Of course I did, I nodded, fingers tightening around my champagne flute. They just didn't come. That was the moment. The moment when the whispers started. The glances. The quiet exchanges between relatives who hadn't spoken in years but could still recognize a family fracture when they saw one. The seats at the head table were decorated with white roses and names were printed on little cards in elegant silver script, Robert and Linda, parents of the bride. Untouched. When I got engaged to Cameron, I didn't expect fanfare from them. They'd never been overly warm when it came to me. They never really fussed over milestones in my life. There were no over-the-top graduation parties when I finished at Northwestern. And there wasn't an emotional send-off when I moved to Chicago for my first marketing job at a boutique agency. There were just polite nods and occasional questions about my rent or Honda Civic maintenance, as if parenting was a checklist and I was just another task. It was Tyler, my younger brother, who got everything else. The spotlight, the back-patting, and the unwavering, all-consuming support that a child is supposed to get from their parents. Tyler was the quarterback, the pride of Millbrook High. My parents adored him with everything they had. They even lied to me about my college fund being lost in a family emergency, only for me to find out, years later, that they had used it for the down payment on Tyler's condo in downtown Springfield and a brand new Ford F-150. Still, I held out hope. I wish I could say I didn't, but I did. A wedding felt different. It felt like something they couldn't ignore, something too big, too public, and too meaningful to dismiss. Maybe, just maybe, seeing their daughter marry the love of her life would finally matter. Maybe I'd get to see pride on their faces instead of indifference. I mailed the wedding invitation to their house on Maple Street. I followed up by text. But there was no reply. I even stopped by a month before the wedding, armed with a binder full of seating charts and catering invoices, half excuse, half olive branch, just to give them an opening. But as I stood in their familiar living room, watching Mom scroll through her iPhone while Dad watched ESPN in his recliner, I realized nothing had changed. I was still invisible. Still waiting for a love that would never come. Mom, I said, careful not to sound accusatory. Did you get the invitation? Yes, Nulin. My mother waved her hand without looking up from her phone. The invitation came in the mail. It's a very pretty invitation, honey. But we won't be able to make it, dear. You won't? What? I blinked. I couldn't believe it. Nulin, Tyler's championship game is that weekend, she said cheerfully. It's the state finals, sweetheart. He specifically asked us to be there. So, that's where we're going to be. In that moment, I felt something inside me go still. Like a clock stopping. Not shattering, just quiet. The playoff schedule just came out last week, she added, like that explained everything. And I understood. I always came second. Sometimes not even that. Mom, it's my wedding. It's my special day. Well, you didn't mention that it was important for us to be there, she glanced up, unbothered. I didn't say that it was important. I didn't think I had to mention that my own wedding day was important to my parents. Across the room, my father, Robert, stood silently by the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around his coffee mug. His eyes flicked away as soon as I met them. He didn't speak. He never did when it came to me. Got it? I nodded. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I just walked out with a numbness I hadn't expected. On the drive home through the familiar streets of our small Illinois town, I kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, blinking too hard at red lights, trying not to let the tears win. By the time I stepped through the door of our apartment, Cameron saw it written all over my face before I said a word. They're not coming, he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Seriously, Nulin. What the hell? Tyler has the state championship, honey. I shook my head. Cameron didn't say anything right away. He just opened his arms and I stepped into them. He held me in the middle of our small kitchen, silent and sure, while I tried to process the fact that my parents had picked football bleachers over bridal aisle. They don't deserve to be in your life, he muttered, jaw tight. Not if they can't show up for this. That night, I called my best friend Kendra, sobbing into the phone about empty seats and broken promises. The next morning, I called the venue and cancelled their dinner plates. 24 hours before the most important day of my life, and I was still cleaning up the mess my parents had made. The wedding day was absolutely magical. The October air was crisp in Riverside Park, the maple trees a brilliant tapestry of red and gold, and the afternoon sunlight filtered through branches like it had been choreographed just for us. Everything felt intentional, as if the world had decided, just for a few hours, to hold its breath for Cameron and me. My grandfather, William, walked me down the aisle. He held my arm with such steadiness, like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. And maybe, in some way, he had. You look just like your grandmother on her wedding day, he whispered. Only so much stronger, little bird. I almost cried at that pet name he'd called me since childhood. The ceremony was heartfelt and personal. Cameron looked at me like I was the only person in the world, his eyes steady and soft, holding mine like an unwavering anchor. The vows we wrote even had the caterers from Bella's Kitchen in tears. Our friends and extended family danced to the jazz quartet we'd hired, laughed, and filled the reception tent with pure joy. It was the kind of love I used to believe belonged to other people, and now it was mine. But the empty chairs didn't go unnoticed. They were right there at the family table, perfectly placed and perfectly untouched, with their little silver name cards mocking everyone who saw them. During the reception, while I was sampling the chocolate bourbon cake we'd chosen from Sweet Dreams Bakery, one of my aunts found me. "Sweetie," Aunt Diane said gently, brushing my hair away from my cheek. "You look absolutely radiant. I've never seen a more beautiful bride, Nulin. But, honey, where are your parents?" "They went to Tyler's championship game, Aunt Diane," I exhaled slowly. "That was more important to them." "Your parents missed your wedding, for a football game." Her eyes widened in complete disbelief. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't say anything else. She just reached for my hand and gave it a tight squeeze that said everything words couldn't. By the end of the night, everyone knew. It wasn't gossip. It was shock. A slow, rippling realization that spread through our family like wildfire. People kept coming up to me, some with pity in their eyes, others with quiet fury burning in their voices. "Unbelievable," they muttered. "Absolutely shameful," my great-uncle Harold declared loudly. "Disgraceful behavior from people who should know better." The wedding was perfect, but the absence was louder than any music we played. Back at our apartment in Lincoln Park, the energy still clung to us like confetti, sweet and electric. We didn't want to waste money on a hotel room since we were leaving for Cabo San Lucas the next morning, and honestly, we wanted one night in our own bed after such a long, emotional day. My cheeks hurt from smiling and Cameron couldn't stop humming the melody our jazz quartet had played during our first dance. He was zipping up his Samsonite suitcase, pausing now and then to toss a Cubs t-shirt onto the floor or check his toiletry bag twice. "Did you pack the passport holder, babe?" he asked. "In your backpack," I said, slipping a bottle of Hawaiian Tropic sunscreen into his bag. "And bring that John Grisham novel you started last month. You said you wanted to finish it poolside." "Look at you, the organized wife," he teased. "Someone has to be," I laughed, soft and quiet. We moved around each other like we'd been doing this for years, folding, gathering, brushing past with gentle touches. But under it all, something was pulling at me, fraying the edge of the day's glow. "I kept looking over," I said suddenly. "During the ceremony. During dinner. Even during our first dance. At their seats." Cameron paused. "They were right there," I nodded. "Right in my line of sight. And I knew they'd be empty, but part of me still thought they might walk in late. That they might surprise me for once." I sat on our bed slowly, the packing forgotten. "I know I shouldn't care, Cameron," I whispered. I knew they wouldn't come, but it still felt like being abandoned in public. Like they missed the most important moment of my life just to prove I wasn't worth rearranging their schedule for. Cameron knelt in front of me and gently took my hands in his. "You are absolutely radiant today," he said. "You always are. But the moment I saw you at the end of that aisle, Nulin, you took my breath away. They missed everything, not the other way around." The next morning, my husband and I left for our honeymoon. I turned my phone off and buried the hurt under tropical sunsets and room service margaritas and warm Pacific Ocean waves. But when we returned to Chicago a week later, everything had changed. When we returned to Chicago, I turned my phone on in the Uber from O'Hare and felt it vibrate in my hand like it had something urgent to confess. Over 150 messages. Missed calls. Tags on Facebook and Instagram. A photo had gone viral. Well, locally viral throughout central Illinois. My Aunt Diane had posted a picture of Grandpa William and me walking down the aisle on her Facebook page. A beautiful day for a beautiful bride. Shame on those who couldn't be bothered to show up for such a precious moment. I scrolled through the comments with growing amazement, the words blurring together at first. Names I hadn't thought of in years from our small town of Millbrook, old neighbors, church ladies from St. Matthew's Presbyterian, parents of Tyler's former teammates, even my high school English teacher Mrs. Rodriguez, they all chimed in with words of support and outright disdain toward my parents. Wait. Her own parents didn't come to her wedding. For a football game? That's absolutely disgusting. That poor girl. My heart breaks for you, Nulin. What disappointing parents. Love and blessings to the beautiful couple. I've known the Henderson family for 20 years and this is shameful. Each comment hit like a pin to the chest. Not because I was ashamed, but because, for the first time in my life, people were finally saying it out loud. What I had always kept buried to keep the peace was now visible to everyone in our small town. Then my phone rang. The caller ID said Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then answered. How dare you let people think we don't care about you, she snapped, skipping hello altogether. You didn't come to my wedding, I said quietly. People drew their own conclusions from that fact. Mom. I didn't have to say anything. We had a commitment to Tyler, she said, her voice sharp with defensive pride. You know how important that championship was, Nulin. Now we've got this ugly situation spreading all over town. Story of my life, Mom, I said. I'm always the ugly situation, aren't I? You're being overdramatic, Nulin, she sighed in that familiar tone that had dismissed me my entire life. Tyler always needs you. But what about me? When have I ever had you? The line went silent. Then I heard my dad's voice in the background, flat and distant as always. We didn't think it would be such a big deal, he mumbled. We figured we could just take you and Cameron to dinner at Olive Garden when you got back. The audacity was breathtaking. That week, the phone didn't stop ringing. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years called from as far as California. Aunts I only saw at Christmas left heartfelt voicemails. Even Cameron's parents, who'd always kept a respectful distance from my family drama, sent a gorgeous flower arrangement from Blooming Expressions with a card. You are deeply loved, Nulin. Anyone who missed your special moment missed witnessing something truly beautiful. But the most surprising call came from Grandpa William. I wanted to say thank you, he said, his voice a little rough, like it had traveled through gravel to reach me. For letting me walk you down the aisle, little bird. I've never been prouder in my 83 years. You don't have to thank me, Grandpa, I said softly. You saved the day. Nulin, my darling girl, he paused. You deserve so much better than Robert and Linda. But you had everyone who truly mattered right there by your side. I cried then. Finally, an entire week after the wedding, the tears came hot and fast. I was alone in our kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear when Cameron came in and silently started making me chamomile tea. Meanwhile, my parents didn't respond for a while. Not after their friends from the country club stopped calling. Not after my mother was uninvited from her book club's next meeting at the Millbrook Library. Not after Tyler, who had won the state championship, was met with awkward silence instead of congratulations when he showed up at Murphy's Sports Bar the following weekend. You see, small towns in Illinois have long memories. And everyone remembered who had missed what for whom. My parents tried to carry on like normal, shopping at the same Kroger, attending the same church on Sundays. But people remembered. Small towns always do, don't they? There's a long memory in shared silence and polite but cold shoulders. Eventually, Tyler texted me. I didn't know they skipped your wedding, Noel. They never told me what weekend it was. I stared at the screen for a long while. I could picture him typing it out, thinking it was enough. That it was an apology tucked inside plausible deniability. I wasn't sure if I believed him. Maybe he really didn't know the specific date, but that meant he hadn't even opened my beautiful wedding invitation with its gold embossed lettering. Or maybe he just didn't want to admit he knew and said nothing. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Now you know. Thanks for RSVPing to my wedding, Tyler. There was no response. The golden boy finally had nothing to say. 3 months later, I hosted a small dinner party at our apartment. It was a quiet thank you celebration for the people who had truly shown up for Cameron and me. It was the kind of evening I used to dream about during those lonely years. Soft jazz playing from our Bluetooth speaker, full plates of homemade lasagna and Caesar salad, laughter that curled through our living room like incense. Grandpa William sat at the head of our dining table, absolutely beaming in his navy cardigan. My maid of honor Brooklyn toasted with pomegranate spritzers. We passed around plates of stuffed mushrooms and slices of lemon pound cake from my favorite bakery. Cameron caught my eye across the table and winked. And no one mentioned my parents. Not once. Their names didn't belong in this room full of people who actually loved me. That night, as I stood in our small kitchen rinsing wine glasses, Cameron came up behind me and kissed the back of my neck. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, surprised by how true it was. "Actually, yeah, I really am." Because this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't a missing piece that left me feeling incomplete. It was peace. Pure, hard-won peace. For the first time in my 28 years, I wasn't waiting for my parents' approval. I wasn't hoping for a love that would never come. I wasn't making excuses for people who had never once put me first. I was simply, finally, free. The empty chairs at my wedding had told everyone the truth I'd spent my whole life trying to hide. And instead of shame, I'd found something I never expected, a family that chose me. Friends who celebrated me. A husband who cherished me. And most importantly, I'd found myself, the woman who was worth showing up for, even if the people who raised me never figured that out. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives aren't about who's there. They're about who we become when we finally stop waiting for people who will never see our worth. The consequences my parents are facing? They're living in a town where everyone knows exactly who they are now. And I'm living a life where that finally doesn't matter to me. The empty chairs taught me the most valuable lesson of all: I was never the problem. I was always enough. I just needed to find the people who could see it.